The Numark NV contains 8 pads, and these are labeled 1 through 4 across the top and 5 through 8 across the bottom. And these are MPC style pads, similar to the pads you'll find on Akai controllers. And the reason for that is because Numark is a sister company to Akai, so these pads are actually velocity sensitive. Plus they light up, they look really nice. So you have multiple modes. Starting from the first one, left to right, you have cues or hot cues. And this allows you to set cue points throughout your song, so that you can jump to any given point of your track. And you have 2 modes on cues. You have cues, you have cue loops, which is why the cues button is flashing. So in cue modes is a hot cue. I already have some hot cues set up throughout the song. I can just jump around to different sections of the song, especially if I'm going to be mixing it in with something else. That's ideal. But if you wanted to create cue loops, we go ahead and stop the music. We'll go ahead and hit cues so that it's flashing. And let's find a section where we want the downbeat to be. So as you can see, I already have the hot cues set up, but when I go into cue loops mode, it allows me to trigger any one of these cues and it automatically puts it into a loop, which is defined by the parameter adjust. Let's go back to regular cues. Let's jump to the top. Now, if I wanted to start the song with an actual loop, and I wanted for that cue loop to continue, I can go ahead and create a new one. Let's go ahead and change this back to cues and set a cue loop right there. And with the parameter adjust, I can make it 1 bar, 2 bars, 4 bars, all the way up to 16s. So here we have a 2-bar loop. And that's predefined by cues flashing and by creating that cue loop right there. Let's go ahead and get her out of that. Just go back to cues. And we're back to normal. Next you have auto and roll, and that's displayed by 2 colors, blue and this green color. So the way that auto works is that automatically makes the selection into 2 bars, 1 bar, half a bar, quarter note, and eighth. And you can just latch it on. But if you want it to be momentarily, then you can change this from auto to roll and do that kind of stuff. Okay, let's jump ahead. Next you have loop mode. And this allows you to store 4 loop locations on the top, which I'll delete these for now. And the pads on the bottom are loop in, loop out, loop on or off, and reloop. So let's go ahead and create a manual loop marker. Now you kind of have to be precise with this because it's manual. Okay, that's a good one. So let's go ahead and lock that to loop number 1 and then turn this off. Okay, let's lock that into loop number 2. Okay, let's lock that to number 3. And let's jump ahead to a different section of the song. Okay, let's save that to loop number 4. Let's go ahead and turn loop off. So you'll see that these are stored, and they're stored by the color yellow. And if I click on it, then it's going to turn green. And if I want to jump to that, I can enable reloop. I can do that with any one of them. Loop 2, loop 3, and loop 4. And then just turn off loop. So the key thing to remember here is that the top paths reflect 4 loop locations that you store, and the bottom paths reflect loop in, out, on or off, and reloop. Let's go ahead and jump into our sampler. And the sampler has 2 modes, sampler and velocity. So velocity sensitive, that means that depends how hard you strike the note, then it's going to trigger that sample either soft or loud. And then here you have different play modes. So for example, I can click and hold this, and I can configure that to loop. Or if I click this button, then I can change the play mode, how that sample is going to play back. Whether it's going to play and stop, it's going to play as one shot, or whether it's going to be played while I hold it down. Okay. Lastly, you have slicer, which is kind of like a sequential way of playing back your music. And as soon as you let go, it's going to continue to play off where it left off at. And with this, you can also adjust the parameter adjust. Bring back our song to a different section. Okay, go back to slicer. Hit shift and parameter adjust again. And the main difference between slicer and slice loop is that slicer loop will behave the same way, but it will actually loop the selection. So almost works identical. A lot of times the slicer works best when you have a vocal line or a phrase or melody that you can reloop. But to recap, you have cues and cue loops, auto and roll, loop, sampler, which can also be set to velocity, and slicer loop. And with all these pad modes, you have the parameter adjust, where you have a secondary function by holding the shift button, as you can see.